Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 499. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I'm talking with Erin Owens Mayhew. She's a backpacker, thru-hiker, and nutritionist. With years of outdoor adventures under her belt, she finally combined her two loves, backpacking and nutrition, into her current business. Erin has plenty of trips to help you figure out the best lightweight backpacking and adventure food for you. And I think this is really important. She has so many tips on finding the best food for your preferences. She doesn't just say this is the way to do it. And obviously everyone has different food preferences, so it's important to find what works for you, especially if you're going on a really long adventure like a thru-hike. I really enjoyed talking with her, and I hope you find her tips to be useful. So who is Erin Owens Mayhew? As a registered dietitian and ultralight long-distance backpacker, Erin created Backcountry Foodie while preparing homemade lightweight meals for her thru-hike attempt at the Pacific Crest Trail in 2017. And subsequent section and thru hikes of the Appalachian Trail, Oregon Coast Trail, Colorado Trail, and Condor Trail. So what are you going to learn in this week's episode? We talk about so many practical things. We discuss the main problems that people face when packing foods for backpacking. We talk about how to find more savory options and avoid sugary meals. We discuss the best lightweight options for protein. We also talk about how to figure out how many calories to pack per day of travel, how much weight you should aim for per day of food, how to create ultralight recipes without a food dehydrator, and best practices for cold soaking meals. We also discuss how to maximize the shelf life of homemade camping and backpacking meals, extra considerations you need to take for cold weather adventures, how to reduce plastic waste when creating backpacking meals. And this one is super important because obviously you're packing things in lots of little plastic bags for each meal. So how can you reduce waste? And finally, why it's so important to pack happy foods on your trip and what are happy foods. So I hope you find this episode interesting and useful. Before I send you on into the actual meat of this episode, I wanted to mention a podcast that I was recently a guest on. It's called The Podcast Bay with Captain Rob. And Rob and I discussed podcasting and other life stuff. So I urge you to check that out if you want to hear me talking about something other than just outdoor adventures. You can find that link at hollywharton.com/links, and it's the top of that list. Yeah, I hope you find that interesting and useful, as well as this episode. So here we go. I hope you enjoy this adventure in food with Erin Owens Mayhew. Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to talking with you about food.
I could talk all about food all you want. This is my thing. I love backpacking food.
So why don't you start out by telling us about who you are and what you do?
My name's Erin Owens Mayhew. I'm a registered dietitian and an ultralight long distance backpacking dietitian at that. So it's a little bit of a career that I've made up myself, to be honest. Prior to becoming Backcountry Foodie, that's my business, I was a clinical dietitian for almost 16 years. So I'd always worked in a hospital and then always hiked on the weekends just for fun kind of thing. But it wasn't until 2016 when I was really miserable in my old job. This is kind of how foodie came about. I had a midlife crisis essentially and decided to up and quit my job after many, many years in preparation for through hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which was my dream that I wanted to do. As I started thinking about food, I was like, oh gosh, like I can't afford to pay for these commercial meals. They're so expensive. I don't like the amount of salt in them. And then being a dietitian, I'm very nerdy about like macros, proteins, and carbs and all those things. And then, so I was like, well, I can't afford these things. So I started looking into DIY options. I bought lots and lots of cookbooks. and then realized those weren't really doing it for me. Your viewers or listeners can't see, but behind me, I have 30 different cookbooks on my shelf. And those are all backpacking cookbooks that you can see. They can't.
Wow.
But I went through all these cookbooks and still couldn't find what I was looking for because I was realizing that I needed the food to be as light as weight as possible, as nutritious as possible, inexpensive. Like I had all these requirements that just what I was available wasn't there for me. So I ended up tinkering around in the kitchen, and lo and behold, like I really enjoy making backpacking food. So I developed a cookbook 2 years later, and now it's since turned on to an online platform to where it's a recipes membership. So I upload brand new recipes every single month. Then we also have a meal planner platform. So I teach people how to plan all their meals, and I teach classes. And this year I'm launching a resupply service for thru-hikers that need help actually packing their boxes, that kind of thing. So it went from 2016 and me panicking like most thru-hikers do to now this is actually what I do as a career. So
Wow, that's
that's kind of the
exciting.
evolution of Backcountry Foodie in 6 years.
It's so great because it's like you kind of tick all the boxes and provide all the different aspects of what people need when they're trying to find the best food for a trip like that.
Well, and that's what I figured out through time too, is what I thought people needed at the beginning wasn't necessarily what they needed. So it's just with time, I've learned what people are struggling with, and then I try to figure out a way to solve that problem. I think we've kind of gotten there. So it's really been exciting.
So what are the main problems that people face when packing foods for backpacking and outdoor trips? So you mentioned getting your macros, you mentioned lightweight. That is my biggest problem. And obviously cost, because it's so easy to buy those nice little meals that are already in a little bag. You just add water, but they're super expensive. So what are some of the other problems that people experience?
I think the very beginning problem is knowing how much food to pack, just knowing where even to start if you're a beginner backpacker. It's like, because backpacking is, I call it a sport. I personally think you're an athlete because you're out there, you're on your feet for hours at a time, you're climbing up and down mountains, you're carrying weight on your back, you're maybe wearing snowshoes. It's hard work. You're not just out there going for a walk. So it's a lot of work. And I like to think of it as like I'm an athlete. I need to fuel my body like an athlete. So I need to eat well because, and this is what's funny is early on, before I paid attention to hiking nutrition, is I would hit the wall continuously. And I was like, why do I feel like crud all the time? Why am I grouchy all the time? Why am I sore all the time? And then lo and behold, I just need to eat better.
Yeah.
Then
So
once I started paying attention to that, it's like miraculous. Like I feel great.
I think that's a really good thing that you said, because I'm also a runner in addition to other things that I do. And people always talk about bonking or hitting the wall in trail running or ultra running. But you don't talk about it that much in the hiking and backpacking community. So what does that mean to hit the wall?
So for me, hitting the wall, I know exactly when it's coming on. It's different for everybody, but essentially, like you've run through your getting nerdy here, sciencey. You've run through the carbohydrate stores or the glycogen stores in your body. So it's just run out of energy. You don't have any more fuel to gas. Essentially, your gas tank's empty. And you can burn off fat off your body for energy, but that's for more lower intensity kinds of things. So if you do run out of carbs, you do have some body stores to get you through. But a lot of our hikes aren't low intensity. A lot of our hikes, you're like climbing, your heart rate's up, you're going up and down and you're climbing up and over things. So those are the times that you need the carbs to get you through. And personally, I know when it's coming on is like my legs start getting like jello. It's like I can tell like it's starting to come, like something's up. And then you might start getting grouchy is when my husband knows it's time. My husband's like, you're not quite yourself, Aaron. It's time to have a snack. And then when I know like it's really full on, like I've totally depleted myself, is I sit down and I can't move. Like my body literally will shut down until like it says, Aaron, feed me. You're not going anywhere. So that's when you've really gone to the edge, like you've hit the point. So ideally, like with what I'm teaching people, is you want to prevent that from happening. It's just eating regularly. It doesn't take a lot. It's just eating consistently to keep your tank topped off, essentially.
So how can people figure out how many calories to pack per day of travel? Like how much should you aim for?
That's a
Obviously, I
really
know
hard
that's
question
different for
too.
everyone, but like
It's
how do you
different for everybody.
calculate?
And we actually, up until 2 weeks ago, that was a very difficult question. We just created a calorie calculator for hikers that will be available. Right now, it's only available to our members because it's so brand new. We're working out any kinks, but it'll be available to the public. So going back to the reason why we developed the calculators, the current calculators out there, like I was saying, hiking is so complicated. The current calculators, they typically underestimate how much you need because they tell you how many calories you're burning while you're actively hiking. They don't tell you how many you need in the full 24 hours. We often will forget about, oh yeah, we burn calories while we're sleeping. We burn calories while we're sitting still. So you could easily lose half of the calories based on that estimation from the calculator. And if you're a weekend hiker, not such a big deal because you can go home, have a big dinner. But if you're going to be out there for a week or more, like that really catches up to you. And then, like we are talking about, you hit the wall, you run out of energy, you're cranky. And I was like, here you're in this beautiful area. Why do you want to be cranky? That kind of thing. So the calculator is just really upset by like how they were underestimating people who are under eating. So essentially we spent an entire year building this as we read all the research possible. And unfortunately, there isn't research for backpackers. So we had to like extrapolate things from like military sources, from like ultra trail running research, that kind of thing. But our calculator takes in your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, is your height, your weight, your age, your sex. So we know who you are essentially. It takes into account what your backpack is, the type of trail that you're on. Are you on like steep trail, flat trail? Are you at altitude? Makes a huge difference. You can use up to 30% more calories just being at altitude. And people don't necessarily consider that. So you can underpack just right off the bat there. Being at a hotter weather burns more calories. So it takes into account for that. It takes into account if you're at camp and I tend to get into camp and go to bed right away. So I'm not one to go around and like go on an extra day hike once I'm there. But if that is something that you do, it has an option of like, I like to explore when I get to camp. So it adds on extra calories for if you're doing like little side trips kind of thing. So it's just extremely complex. Like I said, it took a year to build this, but if you have access to the calculator, it will tell you exactly what you need. But if you don't, going all the way back to is think about the Bureau basics is what do you eat at home? Like, what do you eat on a normal day at home? Because what I found with my coaching clients is that they were packing what they eat at home and not increasing it for hiking trips because they were just putting food in a bag kind of thing for their hiking trips. And then they're like, man, I'm always running out of energy. What's going on? So we went all the way back to you eat 2,000 calories at home. You're only packing 2,000 calories for your trip. No wonder you don't have enough energy. Then we just bump it up. And then the next step after seeing like, what's your baseline, your starting point, then keep a hiking food journal. It feels like a little bit of work initially, but after you do it a couple times, then you'll know during the summer, like this amount of calories works really well for me. This particular trip in the winter, I typically do these kinds of trips. These kind of calories have worked really well for me. So after a couple of trial and error, you know what works best for you. But the easy way is to use a calculator because it does all the stuff for you. But yeah, just keeping a hiking food journal is probably the easiest way because, like I said, my hikes are very different from your hikes and yours are very different from your listeners' hikes. So there's not one number that you can really just put across the board. Everybody needs to eat 3,500 calories for like a weekend trip kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I've recently kind of changed the way I do adventures. Like I used to do a lot of walks here. I live in England, so I used to do a lot of walks where I'd stay at B&Bs. I'd have a backpack on my back, but it would be like a 36-liter pack, and I would eat wherever I was staying. And usually they serve a full English breakfast, which is like a massive amount of fat and protein and just calories. It's fantastic. So I never really had to worry about food. But last year I went on this 2-week backpacking trip. We were camping every night except for one night. And we were going through villages, so we could eat a breakfast if we went through a restaurant. But I also had to pack for camping food. And I realized the first 3 or 4 days of the trip where we were in the most mountainous terrain, I wasn't eating enough. And I just felt like crap all the time. And then about day 4, day 5, we started eating full English breakfast when we passed through villages. And I just felt so much better and I had so much more energy. And sometimes I could even finish my camp dinner when I got in the evening. Like I realized that I was finally getting enough food. Even so, when I got back, I lost 2 kilos of body weight, just like 4.5 or 5 pounds. But it was such a massive difference to me. And it just really opened my eyes to the obviously food is important when you're doing any kind of endurance event, but it just really opened my eyes to what a difference it was once I started eating this massively high calorie, fat, protein meal.
Right. Because, like I said, backpacking is just taking your regular walks at home to a whole nother level. And I just think we don't take that into account when we're packing. We don't think about all those things. And especially like long distance hikers, this is kind of what got me really interested in it too, as I was so sad to see how many people would go home early just because they lost so much weight. And I was like, let breaking an ankle or like something else, that an accident send you home. Like food is preventable. Like you can totally control how much food you eat and don't let that send you home. Like just make sure you eat enough and feel strong and that kind of thing. So that was the other reason why I really dove into this. Cause like, these are things I love being a dietitian. That's the only thing I'll ever be. I love food that much. So it's like, I've got the skills. I'm going to help people. I've got to figure this out.
So problem with food is that it weighs so much, even when it's dehydrated or freeze-dried or whatever. And I know ultralight backpacking is such a big thing because it's hard to carry around a lot of weight on your back. I mean, rightly so. I guess the answer should be you should be packing for calories, not weight. But should you try to aim to keep your food weight under a certain amount, or how do you manage the weight?
So the managing the weight is based on the foods that you choose. So I like to think about, I want to meet my nutrition goals first. And then if I pick the kinds of foods that do that, the food will be lighter ultimately. So I don't like to think about food the weight first, because I think you may have watched some of my videos, like 2 pounds worth of food for one person could be lots of processed, highly processed foods and sugar, versus 2 pounds of food for somebody else could be lots of fruits and veggies, two very different things. So I start out with, I know I need to get this many calories in. So the goal of getting those calories being as light as possible is, I like to think of every bite of food that goes in my mouth has a carb, a protein, and a fat in every single bite, because that ultimately you're getting all that nutrition in each bite. So you ultimately eat less food. Instead of having like a tuna packet is primarily a protein source, like a tortilla is primarily a carb source. And then in order to get fat in, you need mayonnaise or cheese or something like that. So those are actually three different pieces of food that take up a lot of space, versus if you were to do something like, my favorite example is quinoa, because it's like a complete food. It has everything in it possible. Is that you just eat like a half a cup of quinoa and you've got carbs, protein, and fat and fiber in there too, other nutrients. So that's where my ultralight meal planning, my recipes work, because I've figured all that out. So some of my favorite swaps are, I never use white rice, because I just feel like it's a filler. It just adds space and weight. There's a lot of nutrition in it. So then I would use quinoa instead, kind of thing. I never use tortillas, because again, I feel like they're just a carb source. I'd rather use like pita chips that have some fat in them. So they're a little more calorically dense. I never use tuna packets. So then, because they're so wet and heavy and taking up space, that I'll use like dehydrated tofu instead, because it's really light, but it still gives me a lot of protein in there. Or I'll add more nuts to things and more nut butters. So that's kind of the basis of what I do, is I think about the lower nutrient dense foods and replace them for higher nutrient dense foods. And then ultimately you got smaller food.
You have this really good video that I'll link to in the show notes called Thru-Hiker Diets, a backpacking food comparison. And I was so grossed out by the traditional backpacker option that was all like packaged processed foods. And like, I get that that's so easy to pack because you're just passing through a small town, you stock up. But just the thought of eating that, even for just 1 week, just made me kind of feel sick.
Right. Well,
It's just awful.
Yeah. Well, that's what I like to teach too, is that here we try to work so hard and eat healthy and live a healthy life at home. And now we're going out and doing this healthy lifestyle activity, but then we eat garbage. We eat processed foods, like our body, we're working so hard to like be this fine tuned, like healthy. And then you don't have to eat that stuff. It's just a know-how of knowing how do you take, and that's what most of my recipes are. They actually are home recipes that I like fresh, and then I've converted them into a dry form. So I feel like my diet's just a continuation in the backcountry of what I normally eat at home. And I just find I enjoy the food so much better, because it's just normal food. Again, going all the way back to 2016, I was like, I never eat honey buns. I never eat Pop-Tarts. Like, those just aren't things that are in my diet. So I was like, this isn't going to work for me. Like, I've got to figure this out. And that's the other kind of thing I've transitioned. We're talking about with like knowing what my customers and hikers' needs are, is that I've transitioned to making recipes using just grocery friendly ingredients. So we were talking about it takes time and all that, is that you just go to the grocery store. There may even be things in your pantry already, just to make some meals, throw it in a bag, and then off you go.
Yeah. Also in that video, I noticed that a lot of the common backpacking foods are really sugary. I'm not used to eating sugar every day. I try to keep it on the weekends, but Monday through Friday, I don't eat sugar. So I'm really sensitive to sugar. So how can people find more savory options and avoid the really sugary meals?
I think that more has to do with the price point, because a lot of those processed foods are so inexpensive that they're easy to pull off the shelf already pre-made kind of thing, and think of the price. So again, it's more of the know-how of this last season. I was working on it through, I ended up being a section hike, but essentially I made food only from our Dollar Tree here. It's a dollar store. So I proved that you can eat on a budget, that eat healthy on a budget. It's more of knowing which ingredients to use from the grocery stores, like bypass that whole sweets aisle, go to like the grains aisle and get some couscous. There's a box of couscous there. Get a little package of nuts, put some nuts in there. You've got herbs and spices at home, throw a little bit of that in there. Like I have a Moroccan couscous that I think has dates and raisins, some cinnamon, a little bit of brown sugar. And it's all from the grocery store. It's just normal food, but it's in a dried form for backpackers. So I think that's more the key, is just, again, it's all the know-how. Once you know where to go to the grocery store next time and actually look down the aisle, instead of thinking like in the hiker brain, convenience kind of thing.
So what about protein? Because a lot of protein seems to be really heavy. So what are some lightweight options for protein?
And actually, I don't use animal proteins for that very
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Because they're
Okay.
heavy. And that goes back to the whole combination foods, is what I was talking about, is animal proteins typically are just a protein, versus plant-based proteins. You get proteins, carbs, fiber, you get it all in there, and they tend to weigh less. They're oftentimes cheaper too. I'm very frugal. So again, this is my whole thing. Like I want it to be cheap, light, it has to be all these things. I am a vegetarian, but I prefer plant proteins just for these reasons, not just because of like ethical reasons, things, but for like keeping your food light, keeping it smaller. Plant proteins too, like jerky's it doesn't bend very well. So depending on what kind of jerky you have. So a lot of like plant proteins tend to be really pliable because we have to use bear cans a lot here in the States. So even just thinking of that too, is I want my food to be really pliable to actually squish into all the nooks and crannies. So that's another reason why I like to use those sources of protein too. So like I said, using tons of nuts and like milk powders, cheese powders, cheese, all those kinds of things can get your protein in.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, one of the things that I ended up doing on that trip to try to kind of get some protein and fat and easy calories for snacks was I just started buying big blocks of, keep telling this story in this podcast, these poor people listening to me. I've just realized I've mentioned this like twice this week, but a giant block of extra mature cheddar, and I would just like take bites out of it. And that ended up being a really great snack. Like it was cold enough that the cheese like lasted, 3 or 4 days. It was fine. And I felt like it was heavy, but I was getting, like a solid snack because you can only really handle a couple bites of cheese and then.
Right. Well, and it's shelf stable for several days too, as long as it's not like super hot outside.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, exactly. We don't have problems with too much heat here. So is it possible to create ultralight recipes without a food dehydrator, or do you need to like invest in the whole setup? And
absolutely not. Yep.
No, okay.
Again, that's part of I want things fast.
Yeah.
I'm very type A personality, so this all kind of comes through my business. Again, we all work really hard. We don't have a ton of time. You can use a dehydrator. I primarily use my dehydrator just to dry bulk ingredients to have on hand so that I'll dry, especially one of my favorite things to do on the weekends is we always go grocery shopping on Mondays. So whatever is going to go bad, like on Sunday in the next couple days, I throw it in the dehydrator just so I don't have to buy dried green onions later or dried apples. That way it doesn't go in the garbage. It's my way of kind of keeping food waste down. But otherwise, that stuff you can buy at the grocery store. I mean, again, it's just looking at your regular diet. So again, kind of the couscous meal suggestion that I did, or even like oatmeal. I never buy oatmeal packets because I just feel like they're kind of sugary. There's not a lot in them. So you can go get some whole rolled oats. You can get some nuts, some brown sugar, I was actually shocked yesterday. Our Walmart had freeze-dried mango. I was like blown away. I'm like, this is fancy. So, I mean, you'd be surprised in like the snack aisle, a lot of these stores, what you can find. So throw some dried fruit in there, maybe some milk powder. You can get that in the baking section. So it's all just regular food that you can buy at the grocery store. You don't have to have these extravagant machines to do things. I mean, I have a freeze dryer only because it's cheaper for me because I make so much food.
Right.
To freeze dry my own vegetables and that kind of thing. But otherwise, no, it's definitely not necessary.
Cool. That's good. So how do you maximize the shelf life of these homemade meals? When you freeze dry something, how long is that good for? Like, would you prepare these meals right before each trip, or do you ever make a bunch of meals and then save them for future trips? How does that work?
So that's dependent upon the ingredients that are used. So the higher the fat, the sooner it's going to go bad. It'll go rancid sooner. What my trick is, if I'm going to have to make something for an entire season, is I'll make the rest of the recipe that's very low fat early on, and then I'll add in like nuts in particular. I had a bad experience on the Appalachian Trail that I'd packed macadamia nuts, I don't know, like in February, but then I didn't eat them until July, and they'd gone rancid by then.
Yeah.
And it was so disappointing because they're so expensive.
Yeah, and they're so delicious. So it's like it's something that you're like looking forward to, and then you get it, you're like, oh, that doesn't smell good.
No, they were brown. I mean, they were just gross. So I've since learned that go ahead and make the rest of the recipe, then maybe like write a little note to yourself, add like 2 tablespoons of pecans or something, or a quarter cup of pecans on it. And then that you can throw in like right before you leave. And that way you've done most of the work. I try to teach people like do things in the off season when you're bored, when you can't be hiking, like make all your food. And then that way in the summertime comes and a friend says like, hey, let's go for a trip. You're like, absolutely. I'm just going to pull this out of my bag and you can off you go kind of thing. So yeah, nuts in particular will go bad. The more you chop them up, the sooner they go bad too, because it increases the surface area. So the less you chop them, do not put Parmesan cheese and things ahead of time. I learned that lesson. It goes bad within like 30 days. So I will do that too. Like I'll make the whole rest of the recipe and say like add Parmesan cheese. Like right now I take little shakers with me instead. I just fill up the shaker before I leave and then add it. Those are usually the things that go bad the earliest. The others, to really write expiration dates on your bags, your food bags, is whatever ingredients getting ready to go bad the soonest, that's your expiration date. So if you're using a milk powder that goes bad in May, and then like your, I don't know, cheese powder goes bad in like July, then I would use the May as my expiration. And that I think a lot of people don't write down expiration dates on their food. So they're like, "Oh, I don't remember when I made this." So,
Do I take
but
the risk? Do I
do I
not?
take the risk or not? So, yeah,
Do
just
I
writing
really
down,
want to
like
be sick in the backcountry?
right, but otherwise, the typical stuff, like keep it in a cool, dry place are the other things to shelf stable, keeping it as long as possible.
Okay. So, question. If you're packaging all these meals, you're using bags. How can people reduce the plastic waste when creating backpack meals? Because it's like, on the one hand, you want something you can throw away when you get to the next town or whatever. But on the other hand, you don't want to be throwing away, but you also don't want to be carrying it around to pack it out. So, how do you balance that?
That's a tough one I've been struggling with too. I actually have transitioned to compostable bags. That makes me feel better because I counted up when I did my PCT trip, I made 450 pounds of food that year. And it was over 400 plastic baggies. And I was so upset. I was like, and I'm just one hiker. The thought of like how many hikers are out there doing this every year, I was like, this isn't okay for me. So I've since over the last few years transitioned to compostable. Unfortunately, here in the States, they're only available in large quantities, which is really kind of upsetting. So we're actually working on buying them and having them on our website, hopefully soon, to where like people can buy them in like a packet of 10 or 20 instead of 1,000. So, because I think the smallest quantity you can get is 100 for one of the companies here. So, if you have access to compostable, that's what I've been doing. Otherwise, I've also been recycling like the ingredients bags. So, if something comes in, like a dried cherries comes in a zipper top bag, I actually will just put the food back in that and then use that. So, I'm not using a new plastic baggie. And I've gotten to where I prefer to freezer bag cook, but because I'm trying to avoid plastic waste, I actually am starting to actually cook in my pot instead. Because that way I take that plastic baggie back home and then I can wash it and use it again for another trip, that kind of thing. And then if you're not cooking in the bag, you can wash and reuse those. So it's when you actually cook that it really degrades the bag. But otherwise, I've been washing and reusing bags since, like I said, 2016. They look pretty ratty. I mean, they've been used a lot, but they're still functional.
And the
But yeah,
compostable bags, how long do they last? I'd be afraid of them composting themselves if you have a
no,
long trip.
right. No, no, no. They're not that well. The one company that I used this past week, I was really disappointed because they're meant to break down like almost immediately, and they
Ah,
did.
oh,
Because I poured the water in and it literally came out the bottom. And I was like, oh, bummer. So I actually had to return those. I was a little disappointed, but I was like, it's fantastic to grate that quickly, but
yeah.
it's not going to work for a backpacking meal. So the other ones actually take, I think they on their websites it's like 2 years for them to actually degrade. And they're almost like a paper, like a
Oh,
paper sack,
wow.
is what they look
Yeah.
like.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I really like I've been using these for about 3 years now. Unfortunately, like this is a huge bag. Most of my food is so small that I end up like this is how much I use of it. Your listeners can't see me, but I've got a bag I'm folding in half. And the other thing with this, because it's essentially just a paper sack, is that if you're sitting out in the rain, it starts to kind of peel. But I mean, your food's not going to fall out, kind of thing. Because the inside, I think it's corn based. I want to
Oh,
say
okay,
the
that's
inside,
interesting.
it's just clear as corn
Oh,
based.
that's very cool.
But if you were to like handwrite something on there and it's raining really hard, it might just kind of like, blah, you might lose whatever was on it. But otherwise, this is what I've transitioned to. I just wish they were more readily available to your everyday hiker.
What about cold soaking? I see a lot of people talking about cold soaking meals as a way to go ultralight because then you don't have to carry the gas can and the stove and everything. Is that something you recommend? Because I feel like after a long day of hiking, I really want a hot meal.
Totally personal preference. I've done both. I have a lot of hikers are really enjoying the cold soaking because of the ease. But two, I prefer a hot breakfast. I thru-hiked the Oregon Coast Trail here one summer, only cold soaking. And that was the number one thing by the end. I was like, I just want a hot breakfast. I want a hot cup of coffee, and I never eat fast food. And I went to McDonald's for a hot breakfast. That's how much I missed a hot breakfast. And I was like, I never eat this, but man, I'm desperate. So I will never cold soak everything ever again. But I think the key to cold soaking too is soaking foods that are meant to be eaten cold naturally, not just soaking something just to be soaking it. That's because you hear people like, oh my gosh, food tastes so bad cold. But our recipes that are cold soak are like deli pasta salads that you would buy naturally cold, or they're like chia puddings, or they're drinks that are like a shake or a smoothie, or hummus. I consider like a cold soak. You just add water and let it sit for a few minutes. So again, that's kind of thinking about the eating food that would naturally be eaten in that state instead of like beef stroganoff cold. Probably isn't going to be very good cold,
Yeah. Yeah.
or like I don't know. I think of like Thai something or curry or something to me
Oh,
just doesn't
no.
sound good cold. So I think it's just the key is picking foods that you would actually normally enjoy cold.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about for cold weather trips? Like, what extra considerations do you need? Do you need more calories? What should you think about?
So cold weather trips, that's interesting. The cold itself doesn't increase your basal metabolic rate, but you need more calories because there are all the other situations that typically are happening as you're typically wearing more clothes that you may not think to add on to your calorie load. If you're in snow, you're typically working harder, whether you're post-holing or even just wearing snowshoes. Now your feet are heavier. You're probably carrying more water because it may be frozen. I mean, all these other things that actually increase your calorie needs. And then something I like to do is I keep an emergency snack on hand for cold weather because shivering, you can burn 400 calories an hour just from shivering. So if something happens, which you never know, I mean, things happen, but if you get caught in a storm and you're cold, then you have this little extra something to get you through. And the other thing about cold weather is protein actually metabolizes. Let's see, how do I say this? Without digging too sciencey, the thermic effect of protein, when proteins metabolize, it creates heat. So it creates more heat per gram of food than carbs and fat. So it's one of those kind of things, if you're going into a cold night, if you're backpacking and camping, that if you have a really solid protein source before bed, it can actually increase your core body temperature. So that's kind of a trick too. It's just you need protein for recovery for the next day, but it's also, you can kind of calculate that in as my plan for staying warmer when you're planning your food at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I do intermittent fasting and I get cold in the winter when I'm fasting, especially if I'm doing an alternate day fast, which I wouldn't do when hiking and backpacking and that. But there was one camping trip I did a couple of years ago where it was really cold and it was getting quite cold in the evenings. It was my first kind of early in the year camping trip, so I didn't have a lot of experience. I was fasting and trying to like eat early in the day, and I was so cold this one evening. And it kind of clicked in my head the next morning where I was like, I should have just eaten something and broken the
It makes
fast.
a
And like,
difference.
it made a huge difference. I was so
Yeah.
cold and I was miserable. It was a big lesson learned.
Well, and that too, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, then you're not recovering because you're not getting into that deep sleep too. So it's just this cycle that just keeps going and going, when just eat a packet of peanut butter before bed and like you're good to go.
Yeah.
Something easy like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people don't realize just how much food can help us when we're tired, hot, cold, upset, frustrated, stressed, whatever. Like, just eat something and it can make such a massive difference. Same with water. I found that water often helps as well because sometimes you're dehydrated and you don't realize it. But it's just putting something in your mouth can make a big difference if
makes a
your
huge
experience
difference.
just sucks in the moment.
Right. Well, and even too, like I pack like a happy food. I call them my happy foods that I know like will always put a smile on my face. It
Nice.
may not, like, I love Snickers. It's not something that I would normally eat on a daily basis at home, but it's one of those things. If it's just a terrible day on trail, I'm grouchy, I'm wet, I'm cold, whatever the situation is, like it will always make me happy. Or just something like that to have on hand, just to, if you get into those situations, it's just kind of this morale lifter.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Snickers, I don't eat on a daily basis either, or even a monthly basis, but on that trip that I did last year, I was loving it.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just
it
something
was my
about
happy
it that
snack.
spreads a happy food.
Yes. Well, it's crunchy, you've got the peanuts, you feel like you're eating something that's of value.
Right?
So, Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really love talking about food with you because it's something that I really struggled with on my last trip, and I need to rethink how I do this in the future. So I think it's going to be really, really useful for everyone.
Oh, good. Yeah, I just really encourage people just to take the time. It does take a little effort initially, but once you really figure out what works for you, then you just replicate that over and over and over again. So do the homework. You'll feel better. I
Yes.
promise.
And you won't be eating that sugary cardboard
Right.
crappy food. So, Erin, where can people find you online and learn more about what you do?
So you can find me at backcountryfoodie.com, and I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Backcountry Foodie. We also have a YouTube channel where we used to post more videos a few years ago, but my husband actually used to be the video editor and has gone back to his old job, so I
Oh,
lost my
no.
editor. So we don't produce videos like we used to, but there are some out there if you want to kind of look at those. The most of my effort is on the website where I'm uploading the recipes and then the new resupply service that I talked about.
Nice. Excellent. Well, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. If you enjoyed this episode, you might want to check out these related episodes. 496, I talk with JF Penn about adventures in pilgrimage. 407, I speak with Keith Foskett about thru-hiking long-distance trails in the US and Spain. 376, I talk about long-distance walks, time and space to think and reflect. 359, I speak with Adam Wells about how to prepare for your first long-distance trail. 354, Stephen Marriott and I talk about the life-changing magic of walking a long-distance trail. So, that's all for now. I wish you the best of luck in your adventures and your adventures in food. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.